Great. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Kevin Lish with the Sero Project, and we are so happy to have everyone come together today to for this second webinar. We did this once at HINAC. We're going to have a little bit more time to hopefully get to more of your questions, but this is such an important topic for everyone living with HIV to either work on because it directly affects them or to be in a place of allyship. But welcome. We are really excited again to bring this webinar back. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Olivia Ford from the Well Project, who will take over, and Kamari and I will be watching the chat to help funnel questions to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Can everyone hear me? All right. So yeah, again, it's really an honor to get to be back here and to be in the presence of my phenomenal co-parents of this baby webinar that we've given birth to now twice, our second baby together.
Nice.
But these exactly
nice.
But
Jeez.
Just really, I'm here with three just brilliant minds, folks speaking on the issue of breast or chest feeding and HIV. And let's just start by going around and just briefly introducing ourselves. I'll quickly cover just kind of objectives for our time together, and then we can get into the
Olivia, I'm sorry,
nitty gritty. Sure.
It's Kevin again, and I've already messed up. I'm going to stop and let the translator come on and give instructions for language justice. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. Please. Yes, go for it.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
So it sounds like in order to hear, we have to choose a language, or is there something that we need to?
Right. So as Stephanie is giving the instructions in Spanish for folks who already know how to utilize it, but because I can't find the slide set that visually gives folks, I'm going to try my best to walk people through, especially for our panelists. The bottom right-hand corner of your screen should have a globe that says interpretation. You will click on that. You will be given options of English or Spanish or off. For those that need Spanish translation, you'll select Spanish and you'll be able to hear our translator. If you select English, you will not be able to hear our translator. I really hope I explained that correctly. And I think once Stephanie is done with the translation, okay, I'm not understanding. Our translator will let us know in the chat what steps to take. And thank you all for your patience while we try our best to exercise language justice within Zoom, because it is very important. Okay, got it. Oh, okay. So I'm going to add a step back. Can everyone see that now the translation is available?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
You can go forward, Olivia.
Okay. So as I was saying earlier, I'm glad that we got the directions as far as interpretation. And it's really fantastic that our session is more accessible in that way. We can go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'll start. I am Olivia Ford. My pronouns are she or they, and I am the editorial director with the Well Project, and I have had the honor of working on a lot of our materials and activities relating to infant feeding, specifically breast or chest feeding for women and other parents living with HIV. I'm going to pass it around the circle. Cece, do you want to introduce yourself and then pass it to one of our other panelists, co-panelists?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ciarra Covin. I'm the program coordinator for the Well Project, as well as I'm just ending my ambassadorship with the Center for Disease Control's Let's Stop HIV Together campaign. So excited to be here as a woman living with HIV and parent. Heather.
Thank you, Cece. My name is Heather O'Connor and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the programs director for International Community of Women Living with HIV North America, or ICW-NA, and also the so-called brainchild of the Milky Movement, which I'm excited to share some more about in a little bit. Catherine?
Hi, happy to join you all again. Katherine Hanssens, founding executive director of CHLP, the Center for HIV Law and Policy.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. And not to spoil any aspects of the conversation, because Cece will be talking about this later, but we were all part of the North American Working Group on Breastfeeding and HIV, breast or chest feeding and HIV, which convened in October and resulted in an expert consensus statement, which again, we will discuss later, but just to keep putting a pin in that, that aspect of the work, we were all sort of part of that effort. Just quickly, I'm going to run through sort of the objectives for our time here, and hopefully there will be a chance for us all to be heard, be on video later and talk, have a conversation. But I'll put these in the chat as well. So participants in this workshop will better understand current clinical and community issues and conflicts related to breast or chest feeding and HIV in the era of treatment as prevention. 2, recognize the connection between HIV criminalization and intervention of child protective services on the infant feeding choices of parents living with HIV. And number 3, be equipped to build foundation for potential community education, creation of safe spaces, or other responses to support and safeguard the infant feeding choices of women and other parents living with HIV in a shifting landscape. So really, and this is my little footnote, is that this is really, I consider this session to be in the context of the sort of really powerful US and global growing movement against HIV criminalization. This is really a recruitment effort to sort of get this issue on the radar of folks who are already engaged in HIV criminalization advocacy and involved in networks of people living with HIV around the US, as more women and other parents living with HIV are aware of the current state of research around breast or chest feeding and HIV, and recognize that transmission risk is extraordinarily low, that this is an option for them. There's more advocacy. That means that more of our siblings may be vulnerable to various levels of state intervention and criminalization. So this is really to try to increase that number of people in the US and in the world more broadly that will say hell no if they hear of that happening in their community. And obviously breastfeeding is a beautiful part of life. We're going to talk more and more about it, but we walk this line of our bodies, our choices, and in the context of extreme bias and potential unwanted and unjust intervention. On that note, I'm going to pass it over to my girl Heather for just an overview of breast or chest feeding, etc.
Thanks, Olivia. Yeah, so just an overview of breast and chest feeding while living with HIV in America. The most important thing to understand is that most of the studies that we have are coming from sub-Saharan Africa or low resource settings. But according to such studies, one of them being the PROMISE studies, that were conducted among mothers on antiretrovirals. The mothers were undetectable during the time that they had breastfed exclusively, meaning no mixed feeding, which is going from formula to breast milk. The risk of transmission from mother to child was less than 1%. That being said, because the studies were done in a low resource setting, there's also room for error in those studies, meaning we're not exactly sure whether or not the viral loads were undetectable the entire time. There are very limited resources from the US as far as breastfeeding and HIV, but we do know if the parent, the mother or birthing parent is undetectable, risk of transmission for sure, less than 1% chance. Also want to point out that the standard for undetectable in Africa is different than the United States. Now our viral load testing can detect down to, I believe it's like 2 copies of the virus per milliliter of blood. I know my infectious disease doctor tests for less than 20 copies of virus per milliliter of blood. So those are some things to consider. That being said, the CDC does not recommend that parents living with HIV, mothers or birthing parents living with HIV in the United States breast or chest feed their child because it is a high resource setting. We have access to clean water. They recommend solely formula feeding. And in other low resource settings, it is recommended to exclusively breastfeed because the risk of malnutrition or of diarrhea due to unclean water, infant mortality in other ways is higher than the risk of transmission from mother to child or birthing parent to child through breastfeeding. So there are cases of criminalization in the United States as well as other places for parents and birthing parents and mothers choosing to breastfeed their child while living with HIV. And I believe that Catherine is going to give you some more information in regards to that subject. My own personal story, I am living with HIV, diagnosed in 2016, and I have breastfed both of my children. And I'll tell you a little bit about that later on. I think I gave you a good overview. And you will also hear my son's effort in the background making some noise, so apologies for that. Just let me know if you need to know anything else, Olivia. Happy to let you know.
No, perfect. Thank you. Cece, do you want to jump on in?
I surely will. So as Olivia alluded to a little bit earlier, we were all involved in the convening of the WELL Project and the ICW-NA's expert consensus statement. So we all convened, I believe this years are rolling so together now, y'all. So it was October 2020. Was it 2020? OMG. Okay, so we all got together. It was like 21 of us. It was so amazing. So it was a statement that we were all able to put together, experts from all different types of areas, multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral experts. We came up with, reasons why breastfeeding should be a conversation. Seems like this work has been spoken about for some time, but to actually, get it together and to get all of these people in one space at one time, it was phenomenal. So we came up with the expert consensus statement on breastfeeding and HIV in the United States and Canada. It was released on World AIDS Day of 2020. And there were so many great things that came out of that convening. So like just, some context around it. Infant feeding among women and other birthing parents living with HIV is an issue at which many structural factors converge, providing a community with a tremendous, powerful opportunity to create models that address them as it coalesces a field of study and practice. We talked about the priorities and challenges affecting feeding among women and other parents living with HIV. So in preparation for this consensus statement, we took part of a survey, and some of the top priorities that came up were that additional research to understand HIV transmission through breast milk among women and other birthing parents living with HIV. We need that. We need increased and improved education for women living with HIV, addressing the existing research that we already have. We were able to talk about things like the challenges. There's a disregard for the bodily autonomy and decision-making ability of people living with HIV and parents. There's a lack of understanding among providers of existing breastfeeding research, its implications and limitations. We talked about why is this topic important? Like why is this even a thing? I have so many reasons on my own, but together we came up with one quote. I'm an HIV positive woman and mother, and I believe that women living with HIV should have access to all of the information around breastfeeding, as well as self-determination and choice. And another quote that came out of that, which I absolutely love, is a reproductive justice issue. How women / lactating people living with HIV choose to feed their babies. And having done some research in this field, there are still unanswered questions like optimal ARV regimens to prevent transmission during lactation. This is the next frontier in HIV medicine and prevention. Another step that came out of that meeting were some recommendations for how we could move forward. And I'm just so grateful that we're still having this conversation. I believe that the link has been dropped, as well as the Google Doc for you all to be able to sign on. So just hoping that as you partake in this conversation that you'll learn more, you'll get a little bit more insight, and you will be willing to sign on to the statement at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cece. Yes, I mean, since that conversation we've developed, in addition to signing on, again, not to spoil links that will come later, this is not one that I have dropped in the chat box yet, but we also have an HIV and infant feeding listserv to jump on and join the conversation. And they're just, we're between ICW-NA and the Well Project and other folks who are really galvanized by this work. There's a lot of different ways to be involved, which again, Cece and also Heather, I know will, and Catherine will touch on as their presentations continue to unfold. And yeah, and one of the, as Cece was saying, there was a pre-survey to, all of these experts that participated in the working group, and the concern about criminalization and parents living with HIV being vulnerable to that kind of intervention was one of the top priorities, or one of the top challenges that folks who were part of that convening named. It's interesting because in the context of HIV criminalization, we know about one case in Malawi that actually was settled successfully on the, it sounds like the judge was, I believe it was just very aware and just threw the case out. It wasn't into the woman, basically, for a little bit of background, accidentally breastfed another woman's child. It's in a context in which breastfeeding is very common. She looked down, the baby was nursing, and she'd already been nursing her own child on purpose, and she was living with HIV, her child did not acquire HIV. This child who accidentally kind of got a sip did not acquire HIV either. And luckily, the just fantastic attorney and even the judge in that case were able to recognize that there was no intent, there was no criminality in that case. But really, the concern, there are other ways to criminalize parents for their choices in the United States other than the criminal law, which we find with child protective services, which people who can't see me can't tell that I am using air quotes, because there's just like many of our systems, there's really bias and racism and white supremacy, classism baked into that system as well. It's not exclusively about what's best for children. I will rein it in and stop there. But I just wanted to sort of introduce Katherine Hansen to talk a little bit more about the legal aspect, particularly here in the US around this issue.
Thanks, Olivia. I guess I have to say, I want to say that as glad as I am, as grateful as I am to be part of this group and having this discussion, I'm also rather frustrated that we still have to be having this conversation at this point. Having represented a woman actually two women in the late 1980s on a very similar issue, again in the 1990s and then early 2000s. And in each case, a court determining that a mother was not a threat to her newborn. It's, I would say extraordinary, except it's not. It's just incredibly frustrating that this is an issue for women, that this has to be an issue for women at all. As some of the folks on this call know, an incident that triggered interest in revisiting this issue happened several years ago involving a woman who was living with HIV and in care, undetectable viral load, and her a caseworker, a social service person with the hospital who where she was getting her treatment, suspected her of breastfeeding, and based on this suspicion, reported her to Child Protective Services. Again, the air quote is completely appropriate, Olivia. And for someone who had never been involved in either the Child Protective Services system or the criminal justice system, it was a complete nightmare. I mean, for a period of time, her children were removed from her, and she wasn't allowed to live with her other children. In addition to the newborn, she had two other children. And, the case was going on for quite some time. And also, once you're involved in those systems, especially, either one of those systems, there is a sort of presumption of potential neglect attached to you almost indefinitely as you're a parent. And I think it's important to just remember that race, class, and gender have always determined how we approach regulating, controlling sex, parenting, and disease, and that it has been a tradition before HIV that women, and particularly women, have been treated as disease vectors. And often, even in the course of so-called progressive reforms by progressive folks, sex workers have been, even back, not that far ago in the 20th century, arrested, inspected, locked up, subjected to all sorts of brutal treatment on the suspicion that they have an STI. Then as now, all of this is supposedly in the best interest of the woman, being done in her interest and in the interest of her families. And again, Black women are always over-targeted. Then and now, they tend to be the brunt of the use of criminal codes, whether we're talking about suspicions about how they parent their children, or whether we're talking about sex work. And all of these issues seem to be the ones that are the firstest to get kicked aside. And I think it's more than time for us to just not accept that. This is an issue for men and women. It's an issue for the entire community. And if a judge could find 20 years ago, before we knew about U equals U, that a woman was not posing a direct threat to her child through breastfeeding, why are we having to relitigate that now? That's really a question for me. Can I stop there, Olivia? I don't know if I said much about the law, but.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for your many years of advocacy around this and so many issues that are so vital to the lives of people living with HIV and vulnerable to becoming positive. Yeah, no, that was perfect. Thank you. I am now just gonna pass it on over to Cece to share a bit more of her own experience and identification with this part of our movement.
Okay, so I'm going to try to talk a lot slower this time because I'm filled with a lot of passion and emotion, and I just want to cry all the time. So yes, just gonna bring that in a little bit. So once again, I'm Ciarra Covin, and I've been living with HIV now for 13 years. I got diagnosed in 2008 at the age of 20. At that time, I was going into my last year of college, was not thinking about having kids, but when the onset of this diagnosis, that was one of my first questions. I thought that was something that would be taken away from me, was my ability to have children. Shortly after that, I got married. So I was about 22 when I got married and got pregnant almost right away. So, we were knowing something like U equals U before I even had heard of a concept as such. My partner did not contract HIV. And I had a really good provider at the time where I thought that I would have to give birth via C-section. I was able to give birth vaginally. Great. But then came that moment after birth when it was time to feed the child. That is when I came into my biggest roadblock that caused me my most mental anguish. I was not able to breastfeed this child. No one talked to me about breastfeeding. It was that conversation eluded me because of my HIV status. So my child was born early. He was born at 33 and a half weeks. He had to spend 9 days in the NICU. So now I'm leaving the hospital without my baby. I can't feed him because I'm a threat to him. My breasts are hurting. I'm standing in the shower and watching all of my milk just drain down the tub. And I developed great postpartum depression. That was back in 2010. And, we're in 2021 now. And it wasn't until 2019 that I even, it crossed my mind. And this was at the US conference when HIV and AIDS that was held in Washington. I believe we presented with the Well Project alongside Dr. Marielle Rose and Claire, who's a woman from Africa who has breastfed. And that was the first time that I ever heard of a woman living with HIV, who had breastfed, or that there were any possible benefits of breastfeeding. And I sat in that meeting. I wasn't even pregnant then. And I sat and I cried on the panel because it was like, whoa, this is an option. Why is it that, this conversation missed me? The choice was already made for me as soon as I gave birth, and my chart said that I was living with HIV, that I would have to be giving my baby formula. So it was always my goal to wait until, we had gotten a little further, because breastfeeding has been something I have aspired to do. Well, at the beginning of this year, I found out I'm pregnant again. So we're in the thick of it. We just met in October. So, I wasn't planning at that time to get pregnant, but I'm like, yes, we're getting somewhere. I'm hearing, more and more people talk about it. I've met people like Heather who have breastfed. Yes, by the time I go to have my next baby, I should be able to do this. So I've been in care, my entire time of my diagnosis, but I've been with this one provider since about 2013. And coming off of the high of being in a convening, I'm pregnant. Is my medicine okay enough, for me to carry this baby? I see on the side of the bottle that it's not recommended for mothers that are carrying children or that want to breastfeed, which I had a huge problem with too. No one asked me if I wanted to have any babies before she put me on this medicine. I just was trusting everything she told me. But you know what? Whatever, I'll switch my meds at 6 weeks. I'll do that and be pregnant all at the same time, mentally preparing for this. So I'm like, yo, I want to breastfeed. I'm so excited. I want to breastfeed. I mean, my bubble got popped so quickly. And it kind of was a shock at first because I couldn't believe that she was saying to me what I thought that she was saying to me. She first tried the tactic of kind of trying to gear me in a different direction. Well, I don't know if you'll be able to do that. If you want to give the baby breast milk, then they have donor milk and da-da-da-da-da. So I'm like, no, I want to breastfeed. Well, there's no doctor in America who would work with you if that's what you want to do. And I knew that couldn't be true because I had just sat and talked to, all these other professionals and knew that there was some support out there for it. So then the last tactic was the criminalization piece, which was what a pediatrician that we work with, she's known to call DHS on parents that decide to breastfeed. That was enough. If she were my only support at that time, that would have been enough for me to give up the whole breastfeeding idea and to just go wallow and cry and be prepared for postpartum depression again. Spend these 9 months just getting ready to be depressed. But because I have had access to such rich resources such as the Well Project and ICW-NA and Heather and other parents that I know are, breastfeeding, I knew that this could happen. So as soon as I got out of that, it was a virtual call. I called, who I knew that I could reach. And Heather was one of my resources. Like, yo, Heather, how were you able to get past it? How do you still have both of your kids and you have openly breastfed both of your children? And she's like, honestly, that wasn't my experience. Her provider came to her and asked her how she wanted to feed her children. And I could not understand, besides the obvious things, besides the fact that she's living in a rural community and that she's a white woman and I'm a Black girl coming from, the inner urban cities, I could not understand what the differences were and why I was being treated one way, being threatened of DHS being called on me, and why she was able to, indulge in that privilege of being able, privilege is what they make you feel like it is, to feed her children through her chest, through her breast. It was really disheartening. But we were able to find, another provider within the city who would support my choice of wanting to, because at the end of the day, it is a choice. It is what I want to do, not you telling me what I'm going to do. I could change my mind. I could change my mind up until the very last minute, but you're not going to take that away from me. And I have been able to stand very firmly on that and advocate for myself with the help of those around me. So I'm in my 8th month of pregnancy and I'm now able to, buy things like, look into a breast pump and pads and, at least alleviate that part of stress or feeling like my rights were taken away from me because of my HIV status. I'm so hyped. I don't know. I'm so hyped. And now I think I'm passing it over to Heather because it's time for you to share your story.
Thank you so much, Cece, and thank you for sharing. We're extremely hyped for you as well. So excited. So yeah, my story is a little bit different. I was diagnosed with HIV in 2016. Following that, I moved to Natural Bridge with my husband. I got pregnant with my daughter in 2018. And I didn't even know what to do when I found out I was pregnant. Like I'm like, okay, I'm pregnant. What do I do next? And so I researched a facility, went to get my pregnancy confirmed, and went to my first OBGYN appointment, during which they found out that I was living with HIV and actually said that they were unable to care for me because they didn't have experience caring for a woman living with HIV or a mother living with HIV. And so I transferred over to a new facility in the area. I had, recently moved. And so I met with an infectious disease doctor who congratulated me on my pregnancy, told me I would have to have a C-section and that I would have to formula feed, and then told me that she was leaving the practice and was no longer going to be there. So I'm like, okay, great, So then following that appointment, I think they scheduled me with another infectious disease doctor, let me know that I would be meeting with him the following week. And when I went in to meet him, he congratulated me on my pregnancy and asked me how I plan to feed my child. And immediately I'm like, formula. I know we have to formula feed. I know the recommendations. I almost was just, I wanted to make sure that everyone knew I was doing everything that I could in my power to make sure that my child was born without HIV. Already being diagnosed with HIV, my self-stigma by, just my status alone made me feel like a bad mom, and I wasn't even a mom yet. So I'm growing this life inside of me with this fear that I do not want to transmit this virus to my baby. And I can read all day long on Google all the different ways about how like U equals U and there's a low risk of transmission in vitro and everything, but my mind was going, and I wanted to protect my child. And I felt like I couldn't even protect my child inside of my body, So that being said, when this conversation was brought up about infant feeding, and I immediately said I was planning to formula feed, my doctor told me about the PROMISE studies in Africa, which are the studies that I shared with you in the beginning of the webinar. I also can share a link to some resources, and it has some information about the PROMISE studies. But he told me, the risk of transmission is very, very, very low. And, the benefits of breast milk are amazing. I mean, breast milk is literal magic for the baby. And so I went back and forth so many times during my pregnancy about whether or not I was going to breastfeed. I had a lot of different opinions weighing in from family, from friends, and it's a conversation that you don't have to. It's a conversation that I personally approached with such caution because of the stigma regarding an HIV diagnosis. And so regardless of whether or not I was finding these articles that said breastfeeding was an option for me, I was afraid to share them because I am living with HIV and I already have that stigma towards myself, and I know how it is taken from other people. So that being said, I did not get a breast pump. I went to the hospital, I had my daughter, and I started her on formula. And I just remember feeling so guilty about my choice to do that. And I just felt innately that was not what I wanted to do. I remember talking to the nurse about like, what formula is the most like breast milk, like what worked the best for you? And just thinking like, oh, I'm making the best decision that I can make as a woman living with HIV for my child. But that being said, I also was induced at 39 weeks because that's just part of the plan where I live in Virginia, living with HIV, it automatically makes you a high-risk pregnancy. And so they recommend that you are induced at 39 weeks. And my daughter was not ready to come out. She was holding on for dear life. It was over 30 hours of labor and almost had to have a C-section, but she was too far down in the birth canal. I was tired. She was tired. She was born she was jaundiced due to the traumatic birth. And then I gave my baby that formula, and I just knew that that's not what I wanted to do. And I just knew that that's not what my soul was telling me to do, I guess. And so, you know, I talked to a nurse at like midnight the night that morning that my daughter was born, and said, you know, I have had discussions with my infectious disease doctor in regards to breastfeeding. And I let her know about the PROMISE studies. And I said, I would love if you could please just have a conversation with him and talk to him about it, because this is what I really want to do. And you know, actually the nurse was supportive, and we got the lactation consultant in the room. And I just sort of educated them to the best of my knowledge. And then they called my infectious disease doctor. I remember that he called me back on the phone, and he's like, Heather, they want to talk to me. Like, let's just get on the same page about like what's going on. And I said, I want to breastfeed, and I don't want to hide it in the hospital. I want to learn how to do it correctly. I want to learn, you know, breastfeeding is a hard thing. I need support. I'm tired. I'm hurting. I want my baby to have my milk. And he did it, you know, he got on the phone. He told the nurse about it. He told the lactation consultant, and the lactation consultant even came back with a student in the room and said, like, you know, you're witnessing history, because this isn't something that happens in the US, you know, and it's an opportunity for us all to learn. And so I was very, very fortunate in being able to get that support in the hospital. But that being said, Aurora did not latch in the hospital. She was very tired from the birth. But they did get me a medical grade breast pump and had me start to pump. So I was able to give my baby express milk. I was still so nervous about breastfeeding after I made the decision to do so, but I knew the importance of exclusive breastfeeding. So I just kept pumping, and I kept giving the milk to my daughter. But on top of that, I had done some research on flash heating, and how that was something that was done in Africa to kill any virus that may exist in the blood. And that's normally for mothers who do not have access to antiretrovirals. But I was just so nervous about the transmission. And so I was pumping milk for Aurora and then flash heating it, which is, I would essentially pump the milk, put it into a mason jar, boil the water, get it to a high enough heat, and then take the milk out, wait for it to cool down, and then feed it to Aurora, and was barely keeping up with her with my milk supply. And I just was so stressed, worried. I called my infectious disease doctor multiple times and said, I'm just so scared. I'm so scared. I know what you told me about the PROMISE studies, but I'm scared, and I just need to breastfeed my child. I know that this is what I want to be doing, but I'm afraid. And you know, then Aurora had to go back for some light therapy since she was so jaundiced. And then that was the first time that I had to defend my choice to choose my baby, or defend my choice to feed my baby with my breast milk, living with HIV. And I remember there was just a panel of nurses and a doctor, and I explained, you know, I'm living with HIV. Here are the studies. The risk of transmission is less than 1%. My child is on AZT as a preventative twice a day. I'm undetectable. I've been undetectable since 2016. I adhere to my medication. I give my child her medication, and this is my choice. And there was definitely, there was some silence. But it was my first time also having to defend my child as a mother. And I myself am a very shy person who has a very hard time standing up for herself, but not for my children. And so Mama Lion jumped right up and I said, you know, this is my decision. This is what I'm doing. So the doctor said, well, it's not CDC recommended, but I'll let you do it. The lactation consultant, because Aurora wasn't nursing, I had asked for some assistance and she refused to help me because I was living with HIV. Until one of the nurses had a conversation with her and she very hesitantly came into the room and popped my boob in my daughter's mouth and said, oh, she's not latching. Maybe I'll get you a nipple shield. Yeah. And said, you know, you just have to shove it in her mouth. Oh, I don't know. She must be tired. And so she was not there. She was not feeling my energy. She was not listening. She very much did not want to be there. And I could feel that she just was so fueled by misinformation and stigma, that she wanted to get out of that room, you know. And so my daughter didn't latch until she was 3 months old, but I continued pumping, flash feeding, and feeding my daughter express milk for those first to almost 3 months. It was hard. It was really, really hard. But finally, I talked to my infectious disease doctor and my child's pediatrician about, if you're going to choose to breastfeed, the biggest benefit is the antibodies that are being produced in your milk. And so if you're flash feeding your milk, you're killing a lot of those antibodies, which is the reason why we would want to breastfeed. But at that point, it was almost like, well, if you're choosing to flash feed the milk, then, it's taking those benefits away, right? So what's the difference between that and formula at that point? There's not very much, because that's the beautiful part about the breast milk is the antibodies. So I decided to stop flash feeding, and then I just started pumping and feeding my daughter the bottles, which was easier, and eventually she latched, which was great. I did get a very severe infection on my nipples because I also had no idea how to use a breast pump. So I was just turning it up to the highest setting, thinking that would help me to make more milk. And it just caused a lot of trauma to my nipples. And then my daughter got thrush in her mouth, so it transferred over to me. And so it was very painful to pump. I called La Leche League, which is a support network for breastfeeding mothers. It's actually an international network, and explained what was going on and asked for some support. And I let her know what I was doing. I'm a mother living with HIV. I am pumping, expressing my milk. And I was also flash feeding. I'm not making enough milk, which also, if your body has gone through trauma, and if you do have that trauma on your nipples, breastfeeding it's such an internal process that if you're stressed out or your body is in pain, your milk production will actually slow and sometimes come to a halt, which ultimately was what was happening to me. And the lactation consultant on the phone told me that she had just gone to a seminar for the La Leche League, in which she was told if she were to find out that a mother was living with HIV and breastfeeding, to immediately report them to CPS. So I'm sitting on my bathroom floor, holding ice packs to my nipples, holding my crying child who is hungry, and then thinking that CPS was going to take my child away. And I'm a white woman, and as CC says, I am very aware of my privilege as a white woman with HIV. And I am very aware that physicians and other people look at me as a young woman living with HIV in a way that they feel sorry for me and wonder what happened to me. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, someone else might look at Cece and wonder what she did to acquire HIV. And that is a very real thing that is an uncomfortable topic to talk about. And I didn't always know my place as a white woman, how to speak about it. But then I just realized that if I don't talk about it, then it's not being talked about by white people. And so I've just decided to make that part of the conversation, especially with myself living in the South. If we were to flip the script and I was Cece and Cece went through everything that I went through, I don't think it would have been the same outcome. And that's just the reality of it. And it sucks and it's messed up and it's got to change and it's got to be called out in every instance that it can be. So I'm going to continue calling that out. But that being said, I got off the phone with a La Leche leak with no help at all. Eventually, my daughter did end up latching and nursing, and we were able to have such a beautiful breastfeeding journey for 14 months. And as my daughter was being tested and these negative tests started coming back, I felt better, and I was like, you're right, this is good. When I was breastfeeding my daughter and she was getting breast milk, her jaundice was going away and it went away quickly, way quicker than when she was on the formula. And so that was wonderful. My daughter is HIV negative. She is a sassafras, so much energy. She's awesome. I love her so much. And my son, Zephyr, he is 11 months old. And my experience in breastfeeding him was so different because I had done it before. And so when I went into the doctors and was pregnant with him, that was my plan. And I knew what to say and I knew how it was going to go. And in the hospital, he went right to the breast after I gave birth to him. And it was a much more positive experience because I didn't have all of that fear behind me. I knew that it was what was right for him and I knew how it went and I knew what to do. But that fear that I felt with Aurora and that anxiety of just not wanting to transmit the virus and everything, it was heavy on my heart, along with postpartum depression and OCD and things like that. And so, I decided that this was such a passionate thing for me. I never want another mother or birthing parent living with HIV who wants to breast or chest feed their child to have to go through that anxiety of, is my child going to get taken away? How do I breast or chest feed? Am I going to transmit the virus? I didn't want that. And so, I decided to create a network, support network for mothers and birthing parents living with HIV who have an interest. And that's called the Milky Movement. And Cece's part of that group. And it's just been the most beautiful, beautiful network of women. And I think there are like 3 now that are breastfeeding their children with support. And it's just amazing to feel just the positivity and the connections and us being there for one another. So yeah, this movement means the world to me. It means the world to me because my kids mean the world to me. And every mother and every birthing parent living with HIV who chooses to breast or chest feed deserves to do so in a way that is celebrated and uplifted and full of love. And it is not an instance in which one is being thrown a bone. It's acknowledging that science exists. It's there to prove that the risk of transmission is less than 1%. And I do believe that in the future, as we advance the narrative, we will find out exactly what U equals U means for breastfeeding. And it will be a possibility for everyone without the fear of criminalization and just an ability to bask in the glory of it, because not only did you breast or chest feed your child, but you did it despite your diagnosis. because that's hard, you know, and motherhood's hard and parenthood is hard. And that's where we're going to end up, and the CDC guidelines are going to change. I promise.
It's happening now. You and Cece and everyone on this call that's getting involved in this movement, round of applause, is making that happen and making those guidelines change. We're seeing change. The research that we have now is sufficient to support y'all's choices and what y'all want to do with your bodies and your children. And furthermore, slowly but surely, these guidelines in resource-rich areas are amending to provide providers with information on how to provide that support. So no excuses. The DHHS perinatal guidelines have that info. And we'll drop a little resource list in there. But I mean, what was really coming up, and when Catherine spoke and you spoke, Cece, and Heather spoke, is really just how sacred and tender the space around pregnancy, birth, breast or chest feeding is, and that to interrupt that and to have these kinds of intervention occur is traumatic. This is trauma. Trauma came up in all of your when all of you are speaking. And a question for all of us here is sort of how can we, in our advocacy, in y'all's efforts in different states and around the world, create environments or contribute to creating environments that shield parents from ever experiencing this level of trauma from people, from systems that are supposed to be supporting them in their most vulnerable and sometimes challenging moments in their lives. Folks have already said in the chat, breast or chest feeding is hard enough when everybody's rooting for you. So now on that note, let's talk. So I believe Kamaria or Kevin are going to make everyone somehow able to be on video and or audio. I'm saying that just as a note of warning. I think it's gonna happen sort of one by one. So people may have their cameras on and didn't realize it, maybe unmuted and didn't realize it. So just take a minute to experience your new status as a panelist. And, if you need to mute, if you don't want to be on video today, do what you need to do, but it would be really wonderful to have as many people as possible share your voices. The chat's been popping, if you want to sort of speak anything that you were naming in the chat here. We have something of a strategy question. I'm going to throw it out there, but feel free to just go far afield of that. You don't have to answer the question because I think, Zephyr, hi. We're stop everyone, this baby here. But hi, sweetie. It'll be really powerful to hear how this information is landing with folks, how it resonates with the work that you're already doing, with your own experiences, and just to kind of sprinkle a little bit of the kind of strategy question piece without any pressure to touch on this at all. What are ways that you or your groups can strengthen your capacity to be in touch with and support parents living with HIV who may be facing intervention from family services or other forms of criminalization for their choices, including around infant feeding. And basically, what would you need? What kind of information, what kind of support would you need to make those connections locally on the ground in your own communities? But again, touch on that, don't touch on that, whatever. Who wants to talk first? I see everyone coming on. This is so exciting.
Hi, Olivia, it's Kamaria. Kudos and amazing job so far, everyone. Just bear with me, I'm still doing the one by one. We have like 40 something people. And there are some folks I think might have settings where I can't promote them to panelists. If after a few moments you realize that you are not a part of the gallery, please either chat to me in the chat box or raise your hand and I'll figure out what I'm not clicking on that I should be. And Kevin, if you could go into the panelist box as well and just help if I'm missing names and just promote people to panelists. Thanks.
I don't know if anyone else wants to speak first, but I will go ahead and enter in my 2 cents. So as I'm going through this journey, I'll be able to let you all know a little bit more after October 12th. But I feel like I have done a lot of preparation from the moment that I found out that I was pregnant to kind of like build what I feel like in my head is like a force shield around me of support. And I'm so grateful for them. So some person did ask in my chat, who is my team now of providers? So I'm being seen at Jefferson Hospital. I have an infectious disease doctor named Lisa Spacek, who supported my choice to breastfeed. Then I have a wonderful OBGYN. His name is Dr. Greg Aline, who will be supporting my choice to breastfeed, as well as a pediatrician named Dr. Liz Lowenthal, who will support my choice to breastfeed. She's out of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So with those 3 providers, I already feel like, you know, I have somebody to run to if I encounter any type of, you know, pushback in the hospital. I'm really putting so much trust into them. Additionally, I have a high-risk nurse that's in every appointment that I go to. I have maternal fetal medicine on my side. I have a caseworker who will be following me a year after I give birth. So just having those things in place and having the support makes me feel that much more amped and empowered to, you know, advocate for myself and like, I can do this. I don't feel left out there alone like I felt previously. So that is one way that I feel like we can all come together like in band. And as you alluded to earlier, Olivia, you know, just providing that list of HIV-friendly providers who would be willing to work with a parent that is, you know, interested in breastfeeding while living with HIV. I feel like that is a great place to start, because otherwise sometimes it can feel very lonely. And I'm just grateful for my team. Thank you.
Can I just pop in to say that if you encounter a provider who is not, you know, as Cece said, willing to work with you, please, you know, please contact me or contact someone at CHLP. That it really is not acceptable. I mean, you certainly want to work with a provider who you trust and who treats you with respect. So you may not want to deal with that provider, but there are certainly folks that may encounter that person who feels that they don't have a choice. And I guess one other thing, if you anticipate some kind of resistance, I think it's a good idea to at least have, I mean, you know, as you can, you know, you don't need a lawyer, as is obvious from this panel, to get these things resolved. But if you feel you might want to have backup in your, you know, in your corner, you want to do that before Child Protective Services gets contacted. You really don't want that to happen at all. So if you ever need assistance or identifying an attorney in the state where you are, please feel free to give us a call or email.
And I think for those in the chat that are saying there's feedback, I think we were able to handle it. Sorry to interrupt again. There is a hand raised. Allison has their hand raised. Also, just reminding folks as you come off mute to speak, share, ask questions, to speak as I guess slowly as possible for our translator. And I had another thing I was going to say and I forgot, so I'll put it in the chat.
Hi, I'm Alison Symington, and I'm an advocate based in Toronto, Canada. I know some of you, and I'm also working with the HIV Justice Network right now on their breastfeeding project, and have spoken with a few of you in that context as well. And I actually had a question for you, Catherine, about the use of law in these cases in the US. Are there any reports written that kind of document the cases? You've mentioned a few, and I think it'd be helpful in terms of the global advocacy that's being done, as well as the work being done in Canada, to not have US and the rest of the world, but to pull those things together a little bit. So I was wondering if you could just point me to the best resources to find out about the legal interventions in the United States.
Yeah, a lot of, Allison, I think ACS cases are almost never reported. Which is, ACS is the New York facility, but Child Protective Services proceedings tend to be confidential, so those are not reported decisions. There is, I don't have a list of cases, I mean, partly for that reason. But I think we have a couple posted on the website, and I'll, because I'm impossibly bad at multitasking, I'll have to forward it to the moderators probably after this. But there is a reported decision out of Maine where a federal district court judge agreed to incarcerate a woman beyond her release date. This was a woman living with HIV who was arrested for falsification of immigration documents, which is why she was in federal custody. And when it was revealed to the court that she was living with HIV, the judge decided that to protect her fetus, that he would continue her incarceration until after childbirth, which was, I keep saying, I think extraordinary, and yet, I think everyone on this panel and probably listening has encountered what seems like invincible ignorance about HIV at every level of professionals that we have to deal with. We participated as an amicus, but I mean, to the judge's credit, he acknowledged that he was misinformed about the nature of HIV. This was even a woman who was in treatment at the time. That I think is on our website, but I'll check and see, Allison. But no collection of cases, which I think was your question.
Okay, great. And the next question is from Paquita. Go ahead with your question.
Hi everyone, thank you for such a fantastic panel. So my name is Paquita, my pronouns are she and her. I'm a woman living with HIV. I'm based in London, in the UK. And I wanted to ask you if you have any experience or reflections on supporting women and other parents living with HIV who have a history of migration and conversations around that. I'm particularly asking maybe from two lenses, definitely the legal side, especially if they are undocumented, but then also even if they do have legal status in the UK, in the US, I'm too used to saying in the UK, in the US, around, potentially coming from a country of origin where, sorry, I'm collecting my thoughts, where they may have been advised to breastfeed, or potentially have relatives or friends or people who they know are breastfeeding and are HIV positive, but are being told in another place that it's not allowed. So just any thoughts or experiences that you might be able to share. And also I saw Davina's note in the chat. I'll write my email address to you because I have some information about supporting women in London and in the UK more broadly as well. If that's helpful, you can reach out to me. Thanks.
Beautiful. Love these connections being made. Looks like Dr. Levison's got her hand raised. I don't know if that's a separate question or a response to Paquita.
It's a response. in our setting, I'm in Houston, Texas, the whether whether documented or not, I don't think has been an issue for us. We've had one case where a lactation specialist did call CPS, but we rapidly diffused that. But I don't think it had anything to do with legal status. Oh, there was something else you said that and I think it's a matter of finding clinicians both on the OB side and the pediatric side to support you. And one other is just that at a conference a few years ago, there was a woman who had grown up in Africa, who's made the comment, "Why is my breast milk more valuable and more, given more value in Africa than in the United States?" And I thought that was a very poignant question. Among our women who have breastfed, it's been primarily women who have come from Africa, but not only, but there because we have very big Nigerian community, Ethiopian community, Cameroonian community here in Houston, and the social pressures are just as great as if they were back home. And to be seen not breastfeeding is the equivalent of waving a red flag saying, "I have HIV." The stigma in those communities, I mean, we have enough stigma in the US, but the stigma in those communities remains extremely high.
I just wanted to add ditto to what Judy said. I think one of the most helpful things in the situation that we were describing is locating someone locally who is either ideally infectious, both knowledgeable in infectious disease and OBGYN practice. One of the reasons that some of the drafting of criminal law reform bills includes reference to pregnant women, a number of states have included a provision that women and that any kind of contact between women and their fetuses or newborns cannot be treated as exposure, is because of the kind of case that I described that happened in Maine. My concern for someone who is undocumented here in the United States is that we still have states that could treat, that under their laws absolutely could treat breastfeeding or even childbirth without antiretrovirals as criminal exposure. And I think in that situation, it's really essential that you get a lawyer lined up along with the doctor as soon as possible, because of course a criminal charge can be a predicate to some serious immigration problems. When I say that, I mean, I'm not saying that you would definitely lose or that that's legitimate, but here in the United States, we have so many of these cases where the arguments are completely irrational and the statutes themselves are irrational.
I'll say I didn't see anyone else's hand raised. That was exactly the case that was raised at my old doctor, where she was explaining a case of a woman that had come from outside of the US, and it was in her culture to breastfeed. And she came here and, she breastfed, and it caused the defects on that parent. And there literally was no support. There was just all these scare tactics of all the reasons why I should not breastfeed versus, any potential benefit of it happening. And I could never understand why just my location in the world would affect, what I would be able to do with my body. It's so disheartening.
I also would like to point to the fact that, of course, we know this narrative from the CDC and from most places is that breast milk is the best nutrition for your baby. But in the US, it's very common that narrative is sort of shoved down our throats, and it's on, all of the posters when you go to your prenatal appointments. It's everywhere. But then it's sort of seen as an option once baby is here, because breast is best, but then where's the support? And oftentimes there's a lot of lack of support, like there are however many mothers or birthing parents on one floor or 2 floors of the hospital, and how many lactation consultants are there? It's oftentimes that you have to wait an extended amount of time until you are able to receive any support on how to actually breastfeed. Apologies for multitasking, but it's part of what comes with motherhood. And imagine being in the hospital and you just pushed out a baby and you have to figure out how to breastfeed and have no idea how to do that. So then there's that mom guilt that you get, or the parent guilt that you get, because breast is best and I need to provide this for my child, but I don't know how to do that. And so living with HIV is only something to add to the picture, and so it's just, it's so important to find supportive providers and to hook yourself up with this support system, a supportive OBGYN. You need an OBGYN to be on board. You need an infectious disease doctor to be on board. You need a pediatrician set up for your child who is also going to support you and be on board. And then you need lactation support as well. And so it really is, there is a checklist of things that need to be discussed and put in place for someone living with HIV who chooses to body feed their child, to make sure that if there are any criminalization threats coming their way, then you have the resources. You have the Sero Project. You have the Center for HIV Law and Policy. Apologies. But we have those resources, thank you, which I also did put the link tree that I've designed for the Milky Movement, which does have those resources, links to those websites so you can reach out. But not only that, but then you can just refer, like, here's the number to my infectious disease doctor. They'll counsel you, and that way, because they want to listen to medical professionals, right? So if you have those letters behind your name, then they're more likely to listen to what they have to say. And so the more you can refer back, that's really ultimately going to be the most helpful thing. And then I just also want to point out the fact that I have heard, Bakita, of multiple women migrating from Africa, even some living with HIV had their first child in Africa, did breastfeed their child, moved to the US, and their experience with birthing and feeding their next child was that it is not CDC recommended. We are not going to do this. On top of the fact that even if you are not living with HIV, formula is often offered to parents as a supplement in the beginning of life to help the child to gain weight. Like, for example, with my son Zephyr, he was born very quickly. And so he just inhaled amniotic fluid as he was coming out. And so he was having constant bowel movements, but his output of diapers, which is ultimately what doctors look at post birth to make sure that they're getting in enough nutrition, it was fine, but he was losing weight because he was getting rid of that amniotic fluid. And so the first thing they wanted to do was give my baby formula. And I said, no, I know that I am nursing this baby. He is transferring milk. I'm hand expressing milk, and I'm able to feed it to him in a blunt syringe. The output of diapers, plenty of pee diapers, plenty of bowel movements. My baby is fine, but they wanted to give my baby formula. And how much are the formula companies making, right? Like, that's part of it too, because it's money. It's about money. And it's about, there's a reason that we market all of these different types of formulas, and this type is closest to breast milk and everything. There is money to be made, and so that's huge. And I think Zephyr is done with me talking, but like very done with me talking. that's just my 2 cents. Thank you all.
I'm wondering as I hear Heather speak, like, where do you find the strength to just keep advocating for yourself after you just pushed a baby out or, you know, in these excruciating circumstances in the hospital? I've had to visit labor and delivery a couple of times in this pregnancy so far. And I got into the room one time and the lady's, I'm in pain. She's like, well, you know, how do you plan to feed the child when they get here? I was like, I'll be breastfeeding. And she's like, I don't think you can. It's like, well, why did you even ask the question? But at that moment, I had to just decide that that was a battle that I wasn't going to fight. She wasn't somebody that was on my team, not going to be here very long. But you have to like do so much up here first before you can like really move and operate in this world. It's so frustrating on top of, you know, the antiretrovirals, the everyday life concerns, like it's so much. Where do you find that strength at, Heather?
Girl, honestly, the only way that I can describe it is like Heather left my body and mama entered. Because as I had mentioned before, I am such a shy person and I have been in so many situations where I have not been able to advocate for myself effectively. But after I had spent all that time in labor with Aurora, and I was so tired, it's like I just didn't have a choice and I just had to do it. You know what I mean? And I knew what was right, and I just had to push forward in that way. Just like Zephyr's pushing forward, even though he's tired and wants to go to sleep right now. You got to do what you got to do, I guess. You know, it was hard. It was really hard. And that's one of the things too. Like, you know, you have a baby and you're like, I'm never doing that again. And then a few months later, you're like, I think I could do it again. I guess it's one of those things.
You know, just another note on that. Women do have a fundamental privacy right to make decisions on behalf of the best care of their children. And I think another pre-lawyer, or you don't need a lawyer for kind of thing, when you encounter a provider who asks these kinds of questions, you might say, well, geez, Dr. X, Y, and Z, these doctors are supporting my friend who is doing exactly the same thing. I mean, from a legal perspective, the fact that some doctors are, as you say, willing to work with you is evidence that this is not that it isn't a no, never. No doctor would risk malpractice claims if in fact that was the case. And it may be helpful to have contact information for healthcare providers, such as those that, Heather and Cece have found, and say, look, maybe you want to talk to somebody that knows a little bit more about this. I mean, that, because doctors and healthcare providers do listen to doctors and other healthcare providers.
Just in response to that, Catherine, if your provider is having questions, there is the 24/7 Perinatal Hotline, which is out of UCSF, run by the National Clinician Consultation Center. And if you just look up Perinatal Hotline UCSF, 3 a.m, it's for clinicians to call. And the intention is if you have any question about someone newly diagnosed at 3 a.m. and you don't know what to do or anything like that, but it includes conversations about breastfeeding. And there are both OBs and pediatricians who are consultants for the hotline. And so there are 3 tiers. And if the first person isn't sure, they will take it to the second. If the second isn't sure, they'll take it to the third level. And you will, and your clinician will be able to talk directly with an OB or pediatrician about this if they're not familiar with it.
And can that woman or the provider count on getting a thumbs up on supporting a woman in living with HIV who wants to breastfeed?
I think it's, I mean, let's say the hotline is extremely progressive. I mean, you're never going to get an absolute yes, she should, or no, she should. No, you won't, but you will get support. Yes, I mean, it would be supporting what a woman wants to do if she has an undetectable. It will give the clinician guidelines. Oh, does she have an undetectable viral load? If she willing to commit to exclusive breastfeeding, and asking some, I think reasonable questions as I think what they would do. And then if it's on the pediatric side, they will give specific recommendations about what some of the options are for prophylaxis for the baby, because in the US it ranges from just the AZT, which is what the usual is for a low risk mother giving birth to a baby, to there's an intermediate thing, which is what our pediatricians have felt most comfortable with in Houston, and that is giving nevirapine until 1 month after cessation of breastfeeding. There's the first 6 weeks with AZT and then continuing the nevirapine. And it's being used as both pre-exposure prophylaxis, post-exposure prophylaxis. And we aren't sure if they're treating, if we're really prophylaxing or if we're treating the physicians, but it has made them, feel more comfortable, and everyone's been fine with that. And then, as our Canadian member may know, there's a group in Toronto that has had 3 babies they reported on, where they gave full therapy to the babies that were breastfeeding, which, I mean, there's no evidence to support it or not support it, but that was just the way they dealt with their discomfort. So to know that, that those kind of things would be discussed by the pediatricians on the hotline.
Thank you all so much for all aspects of this conversation. So rich and so needed. I am aware that we are 2 minutes past time, which always happens with a juicy discussion, and there are 2 amazing hands raised. So I have to ask, I know people may have to step away. This is being recorded, but I'm wondering, Kamaria or Kevin, do we have time to just have 2 more folks who have their hands raised earnestly?
And it's more a comment, Kamaria. It's a comment. It's not a question.
So,
thank you, Olivia.
Sure. Just to answer Olivia's question. Hi, Sandy. Yeah, so folks, you have more time. I actually have to step away, so I'm passing over the host privileges to Kevin. But I've loved this conversation, and the recording will go out as soon as it's available from the great beyond in the clouds.
Yeah.
Kamaria.
Olivia, I have nothing this afternoon, so we can keep going as long as you all would like to.
Oh, thank you so much, Kevin. I myself also have to step off. I mean, anyone can keep going after I'm gone too, but maybe we'll just take our 2 comments, 2 questions, and shake it out, see if anybody has anything else, and then we'll just lovingly close out. Look forward to that recording. But Sandy, please, go for it.
Thank you. I mean, I just was in comment to what Cece was saying before. I mean, I was a case manager, so I don't have HIV, but I've always been a supporter of individuals with HIV, especially to my clients. Now, you technically answered your own question, because it's more about the mindset and not making sure you don't internalize. Like, I would be so angry at that lady, but you actually respond in the best way by saying, because you already know what your plan of action, but to have a support system, like you already knew, okay, this person is not part of my support system. I have other people. So I just wanted to emphasize that, like, you're doing good. I mean, everyone has been saying that, but you're awesome. Thank you.
Awesome.
I would like to share a funny story about Cece's journey in her pursuit of breastfeeding. And this is just a little bit about the Milky Movement and everything, but Cece had disclosed earlier that with her second child, she went to the doctors and was very excited about breastfeeding and did not receive any support to do so. So she did call me on the phone. And I Googled physicians around the area that she was in. And I called infectious disease doctors and I got to the front office and I talked to the receptionist. And I actually didn't know what I was going to do. I just know I was going to find her some support to breastfeed. And so I actually called and I said I was calling on behalf of my cousin. And then I got scared and then I got off the phone and then I decided like, okay, no, I'm going to call back. And I ended up calling back and I just told the receptionist like, look, I am a woman living with HIV. I breastfed both of my children. I'm undetectable. They're negative. They're healthy. Here's what the science says. Do you have a physician in your practice that will support my friend to breastfeed? Because this is what she wants to do. And come to find out, super supportive. The receptionist was amazing. She said, I know that there are mothers in this practice that are breastfeeding and being supported to do so. And let me give you their information and so you can talk to the physicians, and then hooks me up with a caseworker who is now CC's caseworker, who is amazing and also super supportive. And we were a network of supportive providers, infectious disease, OBGYN, and I didn't know what I was doing, but it happened, you know. So I guess the whole point in me telling you this, besides the fact that it's hilarious that I got scared and said I was CC's cousin, is that there's support out there. Like there is support to be had. And so if this is something that you want to do, you can do it. And you will be supported in doing it. And we will call and pretend to be your cousin and get you the support to do it. We won't do that anymore. We've learned better ways to do that. But yes, like part of the Milky Movement is that we are patient advocates. And so if this is something in your journey that you're interested in, or you just want to have a conversation, you know, we're here for you, and we have resources. Should you come across a situation where you are being threatened to be criminalized, because that is not anything that anyone should ever have to go through. Motherhood and pregnancy is hard, and you know, that's not something that you need added to your journey as a burden to you. So yeah, I think Olivia, who is always the best at putting the links in there all the time, you're so good at it. She just put a link to the Milky Mama's registration. So if that's something that you're looking to learn more about, then go ahead and just fill out the Google form and we'll send you an invite to join our platform. It's just, it's like Telegram, which is like WhatsApp, and we have a bunch of mamas in there. Some are pregnant, some are nursing, some also did not receive support to nurse. And so that's something to acknowledge as well, because as Cece had talked about before, suppressing the body's natural response to having a baby by, you know, stopping your milk flow is not only a very painful experience physically, but also mentally. And that can be very, very traumatic. And so it's just a space for all of those things. But it's just support and a safe space to have the conversation. So absolutely, if you're interested, we would love for you to join.
I got a question. This is Olga from Youngstown, Ohio. I got a question. Okay. I support you guys. I admire you guys, because when I was diagnosed in 1999, I got all kinds of wrong information and delayed information at that time, where I was not even given a choice to even become a mother. So my question is, like, I support you guys so much because I want no woman to go and, you know, get wrong information. I want them to be mothers, have all the joy of, you know, all the things like breastfeeding, everything, to be a mother, because there's nothing else like that. You know what I mean? is there a way for a person that's not a parent to help you guys?
Why?
Sign petitions, go out there and rally or anything like that, you know, because I was cheated and I don't want nobody else to ever be cheated. And even today, I just go in for a hysterectomy and they look at me like, are you HIV? You sure you're HIV? Yeah, I'm HIV positive. You know, any kind of woman's issues, I still get that look, you know what I mean? And I don't think a woman should get that look. So I just want to know, Indian movement is, you know, allyships. Because I think if you know me, I'll get it. You know, when I'm an ally, I'm on the line.
Yeah. Oh, Heather, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yes, absolutely, Olga. Firstly, if you haven't endorsed the expert consensus statement, which I'm sure Olivia has that link on hand. Sorry. I would highly encourage you to just read through the expert consensus statement, and also you can endorse as an individual just to get your name on there. And share that with your networks, have the conversation, share the resources. Also, we have developed, ICW-NA has developed a formal call to action, which I will go ahead and put in the chat if you would like to read through that and sign on. It's essentially a call to action just to get everyone who is in support of the movement to gain traction to move forward to petition the CDC to change the guidelines, because that's our ultimate goal. But we realize that we have to you know, take steps to get there. But this is our formal call to action, just saying we acknowledge that the CDC guidelines are not up to date and we want them to change, you know. So absolutely, if you would,
Heather, they are aware that they are behind the times. They have a group of people who are meeting to change their guidelines. And yes, no, it was originally going to be just a month or two. And one of them recently emailed me and said, well, no, there's some other things that we have to deal with. I think part of it is the COVID stuff that their energies are going to, understandably. And it'll probably be later in the year, but they are aware that they have something to work on.
That's amazing. That's amazing. This is so exciting. Do you know like what that conversation will entail, and as far as you know, updating those guidelines? Would it be a clause to the guidelines, or are you allowed to share those?
No, I don't know, and I'm hoping that they are in line with the national guidelines.
Yeah,
because I think those have been a big leap forward, and I know some of the people, and so yeah, every couple months I nudge the one that I've been in contact with, saying, so where are we? What's happening? So, but I haven't seen any drafts or anything like that.
Gotcha. Well, I'm here, and I would love to be kept in the loop, and I'll email you after this.
Okay.
That's amazing.
Do you know if in the process of revising the guidelines, they have a advisory committee, or are they including women like Heather and Cece in when they consider what they need to do?
CDC or the perinatal guidelines?
Well, both.
Perinatal guidelines has what we call consumers on the panel.
More than, I guess I've seen what some of those consumer panels look like. So, you know, it's one or two.
Yeah, I mean,
and are they women?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's a nice change.
I mean, and the panel's about 30 people.
Okay. Do you know how many consumers?
I think 2.
I rest my case.
Buy my own lunch if they invite me.
That's a lot of pressure to put on 2 people. I mean, but you know, and I'm not sure that would, you know.
Okay. I'll Yeah, I'll keep,
I mean, it's, you know, I know it's, you know, it's certainly
it's
better
a-
than nothing, but it's not enough.
yeah. I'll bring it up with the group, and because actually, we revise the guidelines annually, and the breastfeeding section is coming up. So it could be part of that discussion.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you, Judy. I
Sure.
appreciate that. And thank you, Catherine, very much.
Indeed. I think we're at after time. I think we probably have to wrap up. And I also think we lost Tamara, who had their hand up for a long time. And I feel bad about that. Maybe they can, hopefully we threw enough links out there that they can reach out on their own if they have a question, you know, or something to contribute. There are other ways, of course, to reach us. But Kevin, did you want to close us out? Thank you all so much. This conversation is phenomenal. So appreciate everyone bringing their full expertise, their full experiences. Just Heather, Cece, Catherine, I love y'all always. Mwah. Kevin?
Yep. Thank you all so much again for doing this. It was just as wonderful it was in June at HINAC. And just to echo what Kamaria said, as soon as we have the recording ready to release, it will be on the HINAC 4 YouTube site, and we'll also, of course, share it with CHLP, the Well Project, and ICW. So hopefully you'll have plenty of chances to share the link, listen again. And with that, I'm going to say thank you all so much for your time, for lively discussion, and helping educate us on such an important issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, ladies.
Take good care, everyone.
There you all.
Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for all of your sharing all of your information and your story. It is amazing. And it's tough. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Olga,
you.
always.
Thank
All right.